Day one of Chargers training camp is in the books, and on offense, Quentin Johnston kicking off his sophomore season in style, and on defense, rookie Cam Hart stole the show.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I am your host, David Droegemeier. I've been covering the Chargers for 9 years, but this is my 7th year as the co-host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen, and please make sure that you never miss a show by going to subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm sure you're probably wondering, where is that beautiful red beard at? Where is Daniel Wade? Well, Daniel Wade's on paternity leave, so he is not going to be here for the beginning of the show, but he is going to be our special guest, so you're going to be able to see him very, very soon. On today's show, we are going to talk about Quinton Johnston getting his sophomore season off to a big start. That's really important, could really change the way that you look at that Chargers wide receiver room. On defense, it's Cam Hart making a big play, getting an interception, and man, that could be really, really important for the depth of that Chargers secondary. But before we get into the rest of it, I have to tell you that today's show is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Without further ado, here he is, Daniel Wade. All right, everybody, I want to introduce our very special guest, Daniel Wade. Daniel Wade, what's going on, buddy? How's paternity leave treating you?
Hey, man, I know we pre-recorded all the first 3 episodes of this week. I know you guys probably didn't know that. Shocking news. But being on this side of the screen, it feels like when I was born, like you're in the womb and then everything's comfortable. You're used to everything. You're like, this is great here. And then you come out and then everything's different and lights are on. People are all surrounding you, everything like that. So feels good to be on this side of things. You're doing a great job hosting. Can't wait to get into training camp. Football is back, and how could, even on paternity leave, I miss this. So we will be having a bunch of guests coming on the show when I'm not able to be here talking about every day of Chargers training camp practice. We will be with you 5 days a week, as we always are. Nothing has changed there, but excited about this one. I mean, if there's any player you could tell me, like, hey, who's it most important for the Chargers to having a big day on day one, Quentin Johnston would have been pretty high on that list. So to see that, I think, is good news for Chargers fans.
It's extremely important for the way that you look at this Chargers offense, Daniel. I mean, with Quentin Johnston last year, obviously we all know that he had his issues, right? With the drops and, with some of the concentration things, and, some of those were really, really important. I mean, I remember the Green Bay game. I was there. That drop was painful. I mean, that one was the difference between a win and a loss and could have changed the trajectory of the season. But that was last year. This is this year, and training camp day one, and Quentin Johnston got his sophomore season off to a big start. Per Daniel Popper, he caught 3 of his passes on 4 targets, which, hey, getting started early, getting that chemistry down with Justin Herbert, so very important, Daniel.
It is, and I think it's great. I mean, the big thing that I know that stood out to you was looking sharper coming out of his breaks. And Daniel Popper said allowed him to create more separation. And also, shout out Daniel Popper. This is, if I had to pay 3 times the price for The Athletic this time of year to get every day of Daniel Popper's training camp reports, which we are going to use here for every practice we can't get to, but I still am planning on getting to some even while on paternity leave, I would do it. Daniel Popper has the most detailed reports out there. Eric Smith did a good job today too. Chris Rim put something out. So shout out all the beat writers who were covering this while we couldn't be there. But David, it's awesome, right? Yeah. Getting the chemistry early, which is awesome. Building that trust that really never got there ever, really, I think, in his rookie season. That just never felt like they had that trust together. Felt like he kept going back to him today, according to Daniel Popper. But it is hard to understate what it could mean for this Chargers wide receiver room if he was to make a big leap, right? I mean, it is one of the biggest, most questionable positions on the roster right now because there's no number one guy. And I'm not even saying you would have to be a number one guy, but if he can even be good in year 2, and then Ladd McConkey can do what we hope he can do, and Josh Palmer can be what he already has been, that looks like a completely different room. I think that's huge. No drops for Quentin Johnston today, too, which I think is the number one thing you didn't want to see, is drops from him coming out of day one.
That's exactly right. So according to Daniel Popper, he said his first catch was on an out route on the 3rd down, And then the second time he caught 2 passes in the same series, where his first was on an out route and the second was on a dig where Quinton Johnston beat cornerback Chris Wilcox. And yeah, one of the things that you mentioned, that I really, really liked was that Daniel Popper mentioned that he was really sharp, a lot sharper in and out of his breaks, which was allowing him to create more separation. And that to me is something that's tangible. That's something that can make a difference going into his second season. And also kind of, is a kind of a tip of the cap to him putting in the work and having to, go out there in his own time and making a difference in his own game and, taking it personal and taking some accountability, because those are the things that make a difference when you put the pads on. Because, hey, anybody can look good in shorts and a helmet, right? When you're just going one-on-one, you're not involving the physical aspect of the game. But when you're talking about creating more separation, that is tangible. So when you do put the pads on, that will make a difference.
Definitely makes a difference. I think the hard thing here is just like, can you buy the hype? Like, can you drink the Kool-Aid again? Because let's not forget what happened last year during training camp, where I was one of the people propagating it. You know what I mean? Like, I was propagandizing Quentin Johnston because I saw him out there and just the physical nature and just the way that he moved. And it's like, whoa. But obviously the physical parts of it haven't been the problem. What Daniel Popper came on here and said before this season started was what scared me a little bit, where he was just basically like this show we had with him, the last interview we had with Daniel Popper, where he was like, I'm not buying necessarily into the Quinton Johnston year 2 hype because they were just so far for him to go as a route runner, creating separation. He was one of the worst separators in the NFL last year. So it's hard to buy into the hype right now, because last year there was a ton of hype, right? And then there was one practice where he dropped like the first 4 throws his way. Remember that?
Yeah.
And then it was just like, oh no, here it is. And it just felt like it kind of unraveled from there. But I think the good news is, David, like, you hear what Jim Harbaugh is saying about him, right? And it's like, well, he's definitely drinking the Kool-Aid, and I trust him, you know what I mean? So it's like maybe things are different this time.
Yeah, and here's what Jim Harbaugh said on Quinton Johnston. He said, I see a big, fast, strong, getting stronger. I think that's a piece that's really been addressed in the offseason with Coach Herbert. And Quinton just getting stronger to go with that speed, that agility, his ability to catch the ball. He plucks it out of the air. He's as good as anybody doing it. But then combining the speed and agility, getting the strength component to go along with it, he's going to be a problem. He's going to be a problem for other people. And when I think about the strength aspect being added to his game, Daniel, I think about when Quinton Johnston had issues getting off of press man coverage. Okay. I think we all saw that, where, that really, you can't get off.
He didn't play up to his size, right?
Yeah,
that was our knock on him coming out, where he's like, he's a big receiver, but doesn't always play like a big receiver. We always said that.
Yeah. And so, getting in that weight room with Coach Herbert, getting that strength up, getting him to be able to utilize that big body frame, that size, to be able to get off press man coverage and be able to get out to his routes, then maybe he will have more success, and you won't have to be as kind of tailored with his game and how you want to use him. You can use him in more spots, and that way that opens up the possibilities of the offense and which receivers you use where on the football field.
Exactly. And like I said, I don't necessarily want to buy into all the hype just yet, but I am buying into the hype that this coaching staff is much better suited to find what works best for Quinton Johnston. And if you can turn into something more where you don't have to scheme things around him, even better. But obviously the skill set's very tantalizing. The physicality, the speed, all of that stuff, very, very tantalizing. And you understand why he could be good. But I thought it was very just interesting also, Jim Harbaugh just standing up for his dude, because it looked like he was about to go rip reporters right in front of him saying, you guys have been saying he sucks, and I don't see it. And he stopped himself, and he's like, I'm not really meaning you. He really meant David Droegemeier and all the trash that he was talking.
Yeah, definitely me.
But no, you can tell he's trying to stand up for him. You can tell he's propping him up a little bit and trying to give him that confidence, because I think with QJ, the confidence will be huge.
No question. I mean, and he talked about it himself, where he said sometimes the concentration things, the mental aspect of the game, it kind of, threw me out of things. And so, having your coach, a guy with that kind of track record, that kind of winning pedigree, be there and step up to the plate and have your back, man, that's got to feel really good. But hey, we're going to get into Cam Hart stealing the show on defense and really kind of, making you feel a little bit better about the depth of that secondary if he can keep those plays coming and stringing those days together. We're going to get into that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. But first, I got to talk to you guys about GameTime. GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on GameTime actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. You can get zone deals where you save even more when you choose a section and let GameTime choose the seats. One feature I always turn on the GameTime app is the all-in pricing. Toggling that feature shows you the total out-of-pocket cost with no surprise fees at checkout. One of my favorite things about GameTime is you get that panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. It takes the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, we are back on today's episode of the Locked On Chargers podcast. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning into the show and for all of the everydayers out there for always supporting us. Really appreciate that. And on defense, Cam Hart, the rookie 5th round pick, Daniel, standing out, making plays, making a big first impression on his first day of training camp.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, another guy that, wouldn't have been on my radar as far as, guys that you would think are making a big play. Asante Samuel Jr., I think, is the one guy whose game, as far as the cornerbacks are concerned, is so tailor-made to kind of make the splashy plays and to kind of win, especially this time of year before the pads come on. So to see Cam Hart, a dude, especially David, who, if you were going to say one thing about him collegiately that you were not maybe concerned about, but the one thing he didn't really have in his bag was the elite production, the ball hawking ability. We never really saw that. And I mean, according to Locked On Irish hosts, it's because guys just stopped throwing at him, right? But if you can add that playmaking ability to the frame that this dude has, like, you're talking about something as a 5th round pick where it's like, my God, like, they might have something here. This could be a total steal. Obviously, it's day one. It's one interception, but it's the combination of those things. It's the size, the speed, right? The build, the thick dude, a physical player. Then you're also adding in, ball hawking ability. Like that could be something as a 5th round pick to get really excited about.
Yeah. And hey, we know when you're looking at this Chargers cornerback room, kind of what the starters are going to be. You're going to have Christian Fulton on one side. You're going to have Asante Samuel Jr. on the other side. And then we'll see what happens in the slot. Right now, it is Jasir Taylor that's, starting there right now. Obviously, there's a lot of time between now and when they kick the ball off for the first game of the season. So we'll see how that shakes out. But you got to have quality guys that are available to come off the bench and, be able to step in and play and not see that drop off because, hey, it's football. People get hurt and you want to make sure that you can continue to be competitive. But going to that interception, this is exactly what happened here, according to Daniel Popper. He said rookie Cam Hart made the play of the day on defense. Hart was matched up with rookie wide receiver Jalen Johnson. Backup QB Easton Stick took a snap from Johnson, threw up a go route when he had Johnson one-on-one with Cam Hart. Cam Hart was able to put his body in position in front of Jalen Johnson and go up and get the interception. So that right there, using that body size, kind of like a basketball player boxing out the defender. But he was the defender in that situation, boxed out that wide receiver, put his body in between him and the ball and came down with the interception. That's textbook. Like, that's what you want to do. You got to understand your leverages when you're doing that. He had the inside leverage on that situation and he made the play.
Yeah, and if you're wondering who Jalen Johnson is, because we haven't talked about him at all, it's an undrafted free agent receiver. And the reason we haven't talked about him at all is because we basically think it's borderline impossible for an undrafted free agent receiver to make this roster. Plus, there's too many Jalens. Like, I can't do a Jalen Gill and a Jalen Johnson. Like, it's too many people. But I do think that, hey, that's what he should do at that size, right? If you can stay with a guy, pin him to the sideline, because the Chargers did post a video of it on their social media, so we got to see exactly what happened. And then have that height to go up and make a play, and also make a play while the receiver is coming back through your body to try to break it up. It's awesome, right? And I think that's why he got such high praise from Jim Harbaugh. This transcript is from Eric Smith, Chargers team writer, because I'm on paternity leave. I'm not typing that stuff out. He said to be able to be that long He's pretty strong, like a Derwin James. For them to backpedal, plant, and drive on things, it's harder than the smaller little guy. It's a good, rare combination. Harbaugh added, we look at him and you go, you got the license and ability to go a long way in this game. He's on the right track. Totally true, David. I mean, if we're talking about just the prototype of what it should look like, it looks like Cam Hart. If he can actually play, look out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because like you don't see size. You don't see 6'3" long arms like that at the cornerback position very often. I mean,
and going to the 5th round too.
Right.
Like you think somebody would have taken a chance just based off that combination because you don't see it.
Yeah, the measurables were there. And I mean, it's not like he was coming from a really small school. He's coming from Notre Dame here. Like, this is real big, stage production.
Power 5 football. Yeah.
Right. Power 5 football, big school. So it's not like you didn't have plenty of tape on this guy. You saw what he was capable of doing. But we also know that the shoulder injuries were probably a large part of the decision making process when going in and, potentially looking at drafting Cam Hart. But who made a big fan out of Cam Hart? That would be Derwin James. Derwin James was very, very excited to talk about Cam Hart. And this is what he said. He said, I love Cam Hart. I'm a big Cam Hart fan. He's big, confident guy, long out there. He looks like a basketball player out there. He's so long, but he's learning every day. The sky is the limit for him. If there's anyone on this defense that you want to impress, especially in the secondary, it is Derwin James.
Yeah, I mean, he got Tony Jefferson a contract just by saying that. No, I'm not playing. But yeah, I think hearing that from Derwin James is awesome. Like, I can only imagine myself in those shoes. Like, I'm coming in as a rookie, a 5th round pick. I'm not a starter. And I have that dude saying those things about me. I'm feeling pretty great on the first day of school, basically, right? When the senior comes in and says, like, hey, what's really cool? That freshman kid. That freshman football player is pretty good. And I'm playing on varsity. I was like, that's about as good of a feeling as you could really get. And I think it's also important to remember how freakish of size that Derwin James has. Like, Derwin James at his size to be 6'3", 220 playing, safety in the NFL is insane. And to have his athleticism is crazy. So let's not forget both these dudes are total freaks of nature size-wise. But I also wondered when I was looking through the notes what you thought about another thing in the secondary that I thought was interesting. That was AJ Finley getting the first reps as the 3rd safety with the first team defense, right? Because they mix in different packages and stuff. We know that there's a battle there between Finley and JT Woods and obviously Tony Jefferson, the new arrival. And that kind of the thing I thought about this is, okay, maybe we should take AJ Finley as more of not a roster lock, but somebody who has a very high chance of making the roster. And fair or not, if AJ Finley's out there, it's not JT Woods out there as the first guy off the bench, that 3rd safety that's not a starter, but is going to have a major role on Sundays.
Yeah, well, and when I think about that, it's kind of like, okay, I understand it. Just because AJ Finley was with the team all of last year, yeah, he spent most of those snaps on special teams, and that's where he probably contributed the most. But he was there in that room, he was contributing. JT Woods was on the non-football illness list, so he was unable to be with the team and was unable to kind of make that impact. So I think in the eyes of the coaches, he's got a lot of proving to do. He's got to show up, be available, and make plays before he can kind of work his way up that depth chart. But yeah, AJ Finley, the undrafted free agent, the first safety on the field when Derwin James rotates into the nickel spot. And I think another kind of important note to mention here is that Tony Jefferson, the old man of the group, he was able to snag an interception in 7-on-7. So, it was a kind of an overthrow, but he was in the right place at the right time, and he was able to snag that interception. So kudos for Tony Jefferson for getting his camp started in a bright way.
Love that from the old vet. Obviously only bodes well for him. I mean, I think the important thing to remember about these training camps too is the guys that we're talking about, right? Like the interception came against Jalen Johnson from Cam Hart. Like one of the big plays from Quinton Johnston came against Chris Wilcox. Who's another player that you've never heard of. AJ, Max Duggan threw the ball that Tony Jefferson intercepted. So obviously all these things are great, but now it's about stacking them, right? And continuing to do it over and over again. That's how you make your resume for either your starting spot or to even just to make the team.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Coach Harbaugh told us a little bit about why the rookie linebacker Junior Colson was on the non-football injury list, and that was because he had his appendix removed. So we're going to talk about that and him having to kind of rein guys in a little bit and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. But first, I got to talk to you guys about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP, bringing home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. And we are back on today's episode of the Locked On Chargers podcast. Thank you so much to the everydayers out there for checking out the show. We very much appreciate it. Training camp day one, super excited to continue talking about it. And we got to talk about Coach Harbaugh at the podium telling us a little bit about what's going on with some of these injuries and doing things a little bit differently, Daniel. And he talked about tempo violations. So he's talking about having to slow these guys down a little bit so they don't get themselves injured.
Yeah, and it feels like probably a directive that's at least somewhat influenced by Ben Herbert, I would have to think. And it's just one of the big things I think that we're going to see that's different under Jim Harbaugh than things were under Brandon Staley, and that being one of them. Never heard about tempo violations. Every coach has, limits to what players are allowed to do to each other when you're only out there wearing helmets, right? And same thing with, you don't hit the guy in the gold jersey because that's a quarterback. That's the
3 feet away,
man.
3 yards
exactly
away.
Yeah, maybe 10.
Yeah.
At the same time, when you're looking at the tempo violation specifically, it felt like a lot of the things he was talking about was receiver related, not making diving catches, not making sliding catches. And I think somebody even followed up and was like, well, we did see Josh Palmer make a sliding catch. Is that not allowed? And he's like, basically, yes, that's not allowed because they're not wearing any armor, as Jim Harbaugh put it. They're not wearing their pads. They're not wearing, the leg pads and normal stuff they would wear there. So I think that's nice because what he said, they're basically trying to avoid, we don't want separated shoulders, which makes you think of someone like a Cam Hart who's had 3 shoulder surgeries, especially on day one, right? Because he said, hey, when you lose guys day one, usually, or day 2, it's usually the 6 or 7 month injury, timeline as far as when they can return. And that's what they're trying to stay away from. So I like that. I also like the fact that after practice, they went and watched it and coached it up right there. A lot of what we heard before, David, like what people say is different about Jim Harbaugh. He's like, hey, nothing's too small. He's not afraid to stop things and be like, look, this is exactly what we're not trying to do. Now we can carry on. I like it. I like the tempo violations. I like that they're doing this while they're not in pads. We can see things heat up a little bit more then.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with it. I absolutely love it because he's right. And we've seen it. We've seen it, being Charger fans and covering the Chargers, that in the first couple of days of camp, you got a guy go down for the year. And that's just the absolute worst feeling in the world. That's the last thing you want, is one of your important superstar players to get hurt on a non-contact injury and miss the
Mike
entire
Williams
season.
had one too, right? Like it wasn't for the whole season, but I remember Mike Williams going up and making like a spectacular catch on like one of the first days of training camp, and he like separated his shoulder and then like ended up missing some time, missed the rest of training camp. It's like, I feel like those are what you're trying to avoid. Or guys, it's just like, hey, if you're there and you can make the pass breakup, great. Don't truck stick the dude in front of you to do it.
Yeah,
right?
Remember these guys are on your team, Daniel, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's try not to injure each other, all right? We're all trying to win here. We're all trying to make it to week 1 and get to the regular season as healthy as humanly possible. Yes, wait till you have the armor on, get those shoulder pads, get those leg pads, knee pads on before you go out there and do the real football moves to protect
And you
yourself.
said it was a compliment too, right? He's like, hey, just because I'm saying that's a tempo violation, and it's like we talked about with Derwin James and other guys, right? It's better to have to rein them in a little bit than to have to try to bring it out of them.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to, because it's hard to coach the aggression. You got to have it in you, right? You don't want to have it the other way around. But Coach Harbaugh also gave us a little bit of insight on what was going on with rookie linebacker Junior Colson. So Junior Colson had appendicitis. So that means that he had his appendix removed. So he had to have surgery to get that taken care of. So he was that's the reason why he was placed on the non-football illness list. So to start, non-football injury list to start camp. So, obviously, having an appendix removed is something that's pretty common, I would say. It's not something that's super, super serious. Hopefully everything went well with that and that he's able to come back sooner rather than later. The unfortunate thing with Jim Harbaugh and the injury situation is he's going to be really tight-lipped. He's not going to really tell you anything about any timelines. That's not going to happen. It's just you're going to see him when you see him.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a little even surprised he told us it was appendicitis, honestly. And then he got an appendectomy, HIPAA violation, right? No, I mean, I don't know. But I mean, I think with this, he was on the non-football illness list. You have that right.
Non-football illness list, yes.
But yeah, I think it's important to know it's separate than whatever held him out of OTAs. But what's important there, though, is it doesn't matter if it's separate from what happened in OTAs. The bottom line of it is this is 2 separate times now that we've seen him missing time. Yeah. I mean, I'm a Google doctor. I went on Google to see what the recovery time was for an appendectomy.
There's
like multiple different kinds of appendectomy, so we don't even know what kind he got. And also he's playing football, which is like most of them say, a week or 2 and then you're back feeling good, whatever. But like, those aren't football players that are out there, hitting other men at full speed, running at speeds that normal humans aren't supposed to run. So I think the big thing here is we saw that Deion Henley and Denzel Perryman were starting with the ones, and this is just days that he's not there to try to take one of those jobs away from him.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously we know that Junior Colson has a little bit of a leg up there with this scheme because he knows exactly what's going on because he played in it just last season at Michigan. But Coach Harbaugh also told us a little bit about Gus Edwards. He had off-season surgery. He did not tell us what he had surgery on, but said that he's going to have a long runway. He doesn't want to rush him back before he's ready, Daniel.
Yeah, which is awesome. It's hard to say whether that's a lot different from Brandon Staley. And I think the other important thing as far as it regards Gus Edwards is it's not like he's on the PUP list, the physically unable to play list, right? Or anything more serious. Big. He's out there. So he's seemingly on the verge of being fully back. So I don't think that changes much as far as who, is the lead ball carrier or anything like that. So as far as what this specific injury is, obviously it would be great to know what he had surgery on, right? Because that's important. I did see some fans just kind of in awe on Twitter about how big he is. He's a big dude. That is sure. But yeah, the glide theory, a longer runway at this time of the year, think you absolutely are good with that. And it's probably another thing that Ben Herbert is a big, proponent of. I'm not worried about Gus Edwards. Obviously, he has had injuries, not as long of a list or as severe as J.K. Dobbins, but both of those guys come with their own injury baggage. Love to see him out there. Not worried from a playbook perspective or getting up to speed with the offense perspective. He's played with Greg Roman, G-Row before. Not worried about that at all. But it'll be great to see him back out there. I think it's also just good news in the sense of, hey, he's already back out there doing individual drills. It won't be long before we see him out there at team drills again. Yeah.
And also Carson Barnhart, Coach Harbaugh said he was working through something as well. We don't know what that is, but hopefully Carson Barnhart is back out there very, very soon. But honestly, Daniel, if this right here is the extent of the injuries that the Chargers are dealing with, I think that you got to be pretty happy about what this situation looks like going into the rest of training camp.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I think the fact that you've seen a bunch of other teams around the league, basically as soon as camp opens up, you're seeing a list of dudes you had no idea that were injured, getting not only, put on the PUP list where you can actually get activated off of that before the season starts, but like a Ryan Ramczyk where it's just like, that's an all-pro right tackle out for the season day one. So, and maybe, done for his career. We'll see what happens with it. But yeah, I mean, it's been great so far. That's Ben Herbert's number one priority. He has a track record that says this is not a fluke that you're seeing as many guys out there as we're seeing right now. I love it, David. Obviously, that's obviously going to be such a huge part of what happens this season.
Well, Daniel, I want to thank you very much for being my special guest on today's episode of the Locked On Chargers podcast. It's been too long since I've recorded a show with you, so I couldn't have you gone for any longer. But thank you so much, brother.
Happy to be here always. I'm going to special guest as much as I'm technically allowed to, but we will have, whenever I'm not here, someone who is at practice that day coming on to talk about the show or was at practice the days leading up to it. So we have a super loaded schedule of shows coming out over the next week or so, but also everyone Give a shout out if you're on YouTube to Dave in the comments for doing such a great job filling in for me while I'm on paternity leave, letting me have some great time with my daughter, little Dilly. I mean, it's been a blast, just spending every hour of every day with her. Time I wouldn't be able to have without David Droegemeier. So let him know in the comments how good of a job he did today hosting, because he really has been crushing it. Went much better than I thought it was going to go. But hey, man, I'll be back probably very soon. And if I were to say, will not be my last special guest appearance while on paternity leave, I just can't stay away from the microphone. I'm a mic hog anyway. So I will be back soon, but happy to be on.
Special thank you to Daniel Wade for joining me on today's episode of the Locked On Chargers podcast. Really appreciate him jumping on with me. But that's going to do it for today's episode. But to make sure you don't miss tomorrow's episode covering day 2 of training camp, please go make sure and follow us on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel. And of course, on our Facebook page, Locked On Chargers, our Instagram, Locked On Chargers, and of course on Twitter at Locked On LAC, where we post the show every single day. You can find me on Twitter at DroTalkSD, and of course, Daniel Wade on Twitter at Dan Talk Sports. But that's going to do it for today's episode. But make sure and come back tomorrow. Until then, bolt up.